The heart monitor keeps its rhythm, a steady mechanical pulse marking out the seconds of a life, and then it stops. The line goes flat, and the room fills with a kind of clinical silence, a machine with nothing left to say, nurses moving with practiced urgency, the air suddenly too still. Here's what medicine tells us about that moment. Within seconds of the heart stopping, the brain's electrical activity collapses. Consciousness, everything the person was, thought, and felt, should vanish. Should. And yet, across the world, people who have survived this describe the same impossible thing. They float above their own bodies, watching doctors work on a body that used to be them. They move through darkness toward a light. They meet people who should be dead. These reports come from a threshold that should be absolute silence. So either these are the brain's final fireworks, one last desperate flicker of dying tissue, a chemical surge before shutdown, or something in that darkness survives the collapse. And if something survives, what is it? Where does it go? And does that answer point to something beyond the brain, beyond this world, entirely? Sam Parnia is a critical care physician at a New York hospital. But long before that, as a young doctor in England, he met a patient who said something he could not explain. The man had survived a cardiac arrest. While his heart was stopped, he told Parnia, he watched his own body from above and described details of the resuscitation he should not have been able to see. Parnia was taught that when the brain goes silent, consciousness goes with it. No thoughts, no images, no self, yet this man had memories. So Parnia asked a question that would shape his career. What if the brain does not produce consciousness? What if it receives it the way a radio receives a signal? To test this, he built the AWARE study. Across 15 hospitals, he placed shelves on the ceilings of resuscitation rooms, stocked with small images facing upward. Only someone truly floating above their own body could see them. Then he waited. Over 4 years, the study tracked more than 2,000 cardiac arrests. Most survivors remembered nothing, but a few described a tunnel, a light, a feeling of peace. And one man accurately described his own resuscitation, where the defibrillator pads were placed, how many shocks were delivered, even the movements of the nurses. Yet he could not describe the hidden images. That left the results ambiguous. For Parnia, though, the accuracy of that memory was already a problem, because during that time, his brain had no measurable activity, no blood flow. The cortex was silent. How do you store a memory without a working brain? Parnia's answer is the receiver theory. Think of a television set. It does not create the signal, it receives it. Smash the television and the broadcast continues. The content was never inside the television, it came through it. Parnia believes consciousness works the same way. The brain is not the source of your awareness, it is a translator, a mediator. When the brain dies, the signal, the thing that understands, sees, remembers, does not necessarily die with it. If that is true, then your mind is not made by your brain. Your mind uses your brain, the way a musician uses a guitar. Destroy the guitar, and the music does not vanish. It just stops sounding in this world. This idea does not prove God exists, but it changes the question completely. If consciousness continues after the brain fails, then something about the mental world is not physical. And that opens a door science has spent centuries trying to close. What is behind that door? We are going to look. The door science has spent centuries trying to close is now showing cracks. In the AWARE II study, Parnia and his team placed electrodes on the heads of cardiac arrest patients during resuscitation. What they found contradicts the standard timeline of death. After the heart stops and the brain should be silent, the electrodes recorded spikes of delta waves, the slow, deep waves of sleep, appearing minutes later. Not a gradual fade, but a surge. The dying brain is not powering down quietly. It is flaring up, but here is the puzzle. These delta waves are not thoughts, not images, not the rich experience people describe. So where is that experience coming from? That is where something called a shared death experience enters. Doctors and nurses who are perfectly healthy, standing at the bedside, have reported the same phenomena while watching someone die, a sense of floating upward, a beam of light, an overwhelming stillness. Their brains were never in cardiac arrest. There was no lack of oxygen, no neural malfunction. Yet they describe the same arc as near-death experiences. If these experiences were merely the dying brain's last fireworks, a healthy bystander would have no reason to see them. This is why Parnia now uses the term recalled experience of death instead of hallucination or illusion, because these memories behave differently. A true hallucination from a fever or a drug is disjointed, chaotic, and personal. These experiences have structure, a beginning, a journey, a destination. They are consistent across cultures, across ages, even across people with no religious training, and they change people. Most survivors return with a reduced fear of death, not because someone told them it would be fine, but because they remember seeing it. None of this proves consciousness survives death. The delta waves could be electrical noise. The shared experiences could be empathy and imagination. But it punctures the simple story that the brain produces the mind like a liver produces bile. The experience of being conscious, the thing that thinks and sees and remembers, may not be a product of the machinery. It may be what uses the machinery. If that is true, then what these people describe is not a malfunction. It is a glimpse. And if it is a glimpse, then the light, the tunnel, the threshold, they are not symbols. They are descriptions of a place. What is that place? And why does every traveler describe it the same way? Every traveler describes the same arc, but perhaps that sameness is not a destination. It is a biological script written into the wiring of a brain that is fighting to survive. Consider what happens when oxygen runs out. In the laboratories of high-altitude medicine, pilots who black out from G-forces report the same sensations: a narrowing of vision, pinpoints of light, a feeling of leaving the body. The brain, denied its blood supply, begins firing recklessly. The visual cortex, starved of input, generates its own images, tunnels, lights, faces. The parietal lobe, which tracks where the body is in space, malfunctions, so the mind floats free of the body. This is not a glimpse of another world. It is the brain's emergency response, a seizure of perception, and it has a chemical accomplice. In the 1990s, psychiatrist Rick Strassman injected a powerful hallucinogen called dimethyltryptamine, or DMT, into dozens of volunteers at the University of New Mexico. One described a tunnel and a presence of overwhelming love. Another left her body and watched herself from the ceiling. These experiences match near-death accounts so closely that Strassman proposed a hypothesis. When the body is dying, the brain releases a massive dose of its own DMT. The pineal gland, a small structure at the brain's center, could be the source. It would be the ultimate survival dream, a farewell generated from within. But there is a catch. The brain runs out of oxygen. How do you generate a vivid, structured, meaningful narrative while your neurons are drowning in chemical chaos? One answer is the delta waves measured during resuscitation. Those slow, powerful surges may be the brain's emergency power. Like a city restoring electricity after a blackout, the dying brain may fire in coordinated bursts, reconstructing a world from fragments. The experience, then, is real to the person having it. But it is not a place, it is a process. For a while, that story holds together. Then there is terminal lucidity, which breaks it apart. Every year, neurologists document patients with severe Alzheimer's who cannot remember their own children, and then, hours before death, suddenly sit up, speak clearly, recognize faces, say goodbye. Their brains are filled with plaques and tangles. There is no healthy tissue left to produce a coherent thought. Yet for a few final minutes, they are fully present. No anoxia theory can explain this because these patients are not oxygen deprived. No DMT surge can explain it because their brains are too damaged to synthesize anything. This is the brain's last stand in reverse. A sudden light before the power fails completely. And it suggests that the relationship between brain and mind is stranger than either side of this debate wants to admit. But what is the thing that terminal lucidity resurrects? What is the mind that suddenly returns? To answer that, we have to ask a question so basic it's almost embarrassing. What is consciousness at all? In 1994, a philosopher named David Chalmers stood before a conference and proposed a thought experiment. Imagine a zombie, not a shambling horror, but a perfect copy of a human, same brain, same behavior, same memories, same words. Every neuron fires identically, every reaction matches yours, but inside there is nothing, no feeling, no inner light, no experience of seeing, tasting, or hurting. Chalmers asked a simple question: why aren't we all zombies? Because we have something extra, the taste of coffee, the ache of a bruise, the redness of red. That something extra is consciousness. Neuroscience can explain the easy problems: how the eye detects light, how the brain processes it, how you say that's red. But it cannot explain why there is something it feels like to see red. That's the hard problem, and it is not a gap in knowledge that more data will fill. If we mapped every single neuron in your brain, we would find patterns of electricity, cascades of chemicals. But the experience itself, the what it's like, would remain completely invisible. You could write the entire physics of a rainbow and still miss the color. So when a cardiac arrest patient reports floating above their body, a materialist can say that's just brain chemistry. But the hard problem cuts deeper. We don't even know how brain chemistry becomes experience in a healthy, working brain. Saying an NDE is just brain activity is like explaining a rainbow by listing wavelengths of light. You've described the physics and missed the color entirely. Terminal lucidity already strained the story. The hard problem breaks it open. Either consciousness is a strange byproduct of matter, and we accept we have no way to explain how that happens, or consciousness is fundamental, as real as matter itself, and the brain is more like a receiver than a generator. Near-death experiences don't decide that choice, but they make it impossible to ignore. Because if consciousness can flicker on when the brain is shutting down, then the hard problem isn't just a puzzle in a philosopher's notebook. It's a door. And it's ajar. Somewhere in an operating room in Atlanta, 1991, a woman's brain goes flat, her heart stopped, her blood drained into a machine, her ears plugged with silicone, her eyes taped shut. To every monitor in that room, she is gone. Her name is Pam Reynolds. She was awake for parts of this, held under anesthesia, but kept conscious enough for medical tests. And what she reported afterwards shattered the story we told in the previous chapter. She floated above her body, looking down. She saw the surgeons. She heard specific conversations, a nurse complaining about a patient's anatomy, a surgical tool drilling into bone. Everything she described matched the surgical log, including instruments and words she had no way to know. Her brain was electrically silent. There was no chemistry to generate a hallucination. So what was perceiving? What was remembering? This is the receiver theory made concrete, and it works like a radio. A radio does not create music. It picks up signals that already exist. Smash the radio, and the music seems to stop, but only because the receiver is broken. The broadcast continues, invisible, everywhere. If the brain is not a generator but a receiver, then when the brain dies, the signal doesn't end. It just stops being tuned. That is already strange. Then comes the part that no one can explain. Researchers have collected thousands of near-death accounts from every continent, from every religion, from people who never read a spiritual text. The same elements appear, in the same order. A feeling of peace, the sensation of leaving the body, a tunnel, a presence of light, a life review where every action is relived, not from your perspective, but from everyone you affected. The Tibetan Book of the Dead, written in the 8th century, describes a clear light and a review of one's life. Ancient Greek accounts describe the same. Modern cardiac arrest survivors, with no knowledge of either, describe it too. Either this is the single most consistent delusion in human history, or something is being transmitted. But here is the real point. If consciousness can exist independently of a functioning brain, then it is not a product of matter. It is fundamental, like gravity, like time. And if consciousness is fundamental, then the question of whether God exists is no longer unanswerable. It becomes the same question as, what is the source of this signal? NDEs alone cannot tell us that answer, but they take the idea of an afterlife out of the realm of faith and place it into the realm of physics. For the first time in history, the question is no longer, is this possible? It's how could it not be? The signal arrives clearly now, but a signal is only half the story. Every radio broadcast comes from somewhere. So when a cardiac arrest survivor describes a being of light that greets them with absolute, unconditional love, when the same description appears again and again across cultures, we have to ask, what is the source? And more pointedly, is the source a person? This is the old argument from design, but with a new ingredient. 2 centuries ago, William Paley said if you find a pocket watch on the ground, you infer a watchmaker. The complexity, the purpose, the craftsmanship, none of it happens by accident. He argued the natural world is the same. Now the NDE gives us a different kind of artifact, an experience that is not chaotic, not random, but structured. It has a narrative arc, a tunnel, a light, a life review, a feeling of purpose. That consistency suggests intention. And intention suggests an intentional mind behind it. Then there is the moral layer. In the life review, people report feeling their actions from the recipient's side. Cruelty is felt as the pain it caused. Kindness is felt as the relief it gave. This is not a neutral replay of memories. It carries a weight of right and wrong. Philosopher Immanuel Kant argued that if a moral law exists, a law that commands without exception, then it must have a lawgiver. The life review looks exactly like that law made personal. It holds you accountable. That too points toward a being, but here is where the inference gets slippery. If the brain is a receiver and consciousness is fundamental, not created but discovered, then the light and the love might not come from a separate creator. They might be the raw texture of consciousness itself. Think of the ocean. A wave doesn't need a wave maker. It is simply what water does under gravity. If consciousness is the ocean, then the being of light could be its deepest current, not a being outside it. The design might be intrinsic to the fabric, not designed at all. So the NDE does not force us to God. It moves the mystery one step closer, but then reveals another. The universe hosts mind. The universe seems to treat compassion as real. But whether that mind is a person who knows your name or simply the ground of existence, impersonal and vast, remains open. The signal was always the easy part. The question is who, if anyone, is speaking. Imagine trying to measure the temperature of a dream. You can attach sensors to the sleeper's scalp. You can track their eye movements, record their brainwaves, map every flicker of neural fire. But the dream itself, the feeling of flying, the face of a lost friend, never touches the sensor. It exists in a realm the instruments cannot reach. That is precisely the problem standing between us and the question we ended with. We asked who might be speaking through the near-death experience. But what if the speaker lives outside the reach of every instrument we have? Science works by measuring the physical world. A non-physical realm is, by definition, outside its net. This is not a failure of science. It is a limit of the method. And it is a limit that one man tried to break using pure logic, with no sensors at all. In 1970, a mathematician named Kurt Gödel handed a strange proof to a friend. Gödel was already legendary for destroying the dream of complete mathematics, showing that any system complex enough to contain arithmetic will always contain statements it cannot prove. But this new proof was different. It was a proof of God's existence. It relied on no observations, no experiments, no data, only reasoning. The argument ran on a single idea. If God is that than which nothing greater can be conceived, then God must exist in reality, not just in the mind, because a being who exists is greater than one who is only an idea. Gödel formalized this into a rigorous logical system. In 2013, 2 computer scientists ran Gödel's proof through a verification program. The machine confirmed it. The logic was valid. The conclusion followed from the premises. But here is the catch. A valid proof is not the same as a true one. If you accept the starting definitions, that a greatest possible being can exist, that certain properties are worthy of that title, then the conclusion follows. But those starting definitions are beliefs, not measurements. The computer verified the algebra. It did not verify the reality. And this is the deeper problem. If God exists outside physical reality, then no experiment can ever disprove it. You cannot build a detector for something that does not interact with matter. Philosophers call this unfalsifiability. A claim that cannot be proven wrong is not science. It may be true, but science cannot say one way or the other. So the near-death experiences point toward a source. The life review suggests a moral standard. The being of light appears again and again, but the instrument that could capture it does not exist, not because we haven't built it yet. Because the instrument would need to reach beyond the physical, and that is exactly what science cannot do. We are left with something uncomfortable. Not that science has failed to find God, but that science, by its own rules, cannot even try. The question who is speaking may be like asking what is the temperature of a dream, a question that makes sense, but that no tool we have can answer, and perhaps that is the most honest place to stand, not at a solved mystery, at the edge of one that may never be solved, not because it is false, but because it lives beyond the reach of proof. We have reached the limit of what evidence can show, but the people who return from these experiences do not wait for evidence. They come back with something more immediate. Researchers who study near-death survivors have documented a pattern that repeats with striking consistency: a measurable drop in the fear of death, a sharp rise in compassion, a feeling that their lives now carry a purpose they cannot fully explain. These changes are not arguments, they are lives. You can measure them. You can interview families who notice the difference. The skeptic can explain away the experience, but explaining away the aftermath is harder. And at the center of that aftermath, across every culture, every religion, every language, is love. Not a vague warmth. The experiencers describe it as the fundamental fabric of reality, the thing the universe is made of. The being of light radiates it. The life review delivers it, even while showing the weight of cruelty. The message is always the same. You are connected to everything, and love is what holds it together. This is not a theological claim. It does not say which God, if any, sent that message. It simply says that at the deepest level, love is real. So where does that leave us? We cannot prove the source. We cannot measure the realm the light comes from. We cannot even decide whether the light is a person, an impersonal ground, or the brain's final symphony. The threshold remains a threshold, but the people who stand on it and return do not come back confused about the meaning. They come back convinced that the question matters more than the answer. Maybe that is the honest place to stay, standing at the edge, not demanding certainty, but letting the mystery change us the way it changes them. Thank you for watching. If you have ever stood at your own threshold, a moment you could not prove but could not forget, I would like to hear about it in the comments. And if this conversation made you think differently about what might be waiting on the other side, share it with someone who needs to hear it. The mystery remains open. Perhaps that is exactly where we are meant to stand. We began with a flatline, a single tone that marks the edge of everything we can measure. From that vanishing point, we climbed through brainwaves, light, love, and the limits of proof itself. We reached the threshold where science must stop and the mystery must begin. And there we find ourselves now, standing with the experiencers who returned changed. So I leave you with the question, what do you believe happens when we die? I would genuinely like to know. Share your answer in the comments. Thank you for watching. And as you think, listen. The flatline tone is still sounding in the background of this conversation. Soon it will fade into silence, and what remains is yours to decide.